Hello and welcome to Endphase. I'm Teddy and I'll be doing a deck tech of my modern goblins. They're a very fast deck that swings almost every turn, including the first turn of play, as long as you have at least one mountain pretty much. I built it in a more of a wave swinging fashion, so I can have many turns of huge pushover damage, but you'll get it after a while of me showing you it. We're going to start off with a card that every Goblin deck will really need, which is a Goblin Chieftain, which is a 3-drop haste. Then he gives other goblins haste and +1/+1. He's wonderful. He speeds up the deck, and you can play him on turn 3, which is still pretty early in the game for most of the other colors. Since this red deck in particular is overly aggro for its purposes, and it gets the job done incredibly well. Another goblin you're going to pretty much have to run in a goblin deck is Goblin Guide. He's a bit more on the expensive side price-wise, but he's definitely worth the $7 or $8 he's at right now. He's a 1-drop goblin with haste, and he's a 2/2. Whenever he attacks, defending player reveals the top card of his or her library. If there's a land card, they put it into their hand. And for most people, that sounds... It should sound like a drawback, but really, it doesn't matter, because you're swinging for 2 damage first turn, and your opponent might not even have land on the field to do anything about it, and it's wonderful. And then the last goblin you'll actually just need for goblin decks is a Goblin Bushwhacker. Hold the silly name aside, he's a 1-drop with a kicker of 1. And when you kick him, he enters. If you kick him when he enters the battlefield, other creatures you control in general, just all creatures, get +1/+0 and gain haste until the end of the turn. And as a base 1/1, that makes him a 2/1 with haste and wide buffs the rest of your field, which is kind of what I was talking about, which is the wide buff. The next card I have in here is 4 copies of Goblin Wardriver. Wardriver's a 2-drop straight red battle crier with he's 2/2. If you can give him haste with one of the other goblins that give haste, he's really good. He has the battle cry, so when he attacks, all creatures hold him, get +1/+0. And so if you have 2 Wardrivers, they give each other battle cry, but not themselves. They're still really good, and they boost all your creatures, making the small army of 2/2s now 3/2s, and much more dangerous. I then run 3 copies of Mog War Marshal, which is a 2-drop. He has an echo cost of 2, but you don't actually really have to pay it, because whenever he comes into play, or is put into a graveyard from play, put a 1/1 goblin creature token onto the battlefield. And so, if you don't pay his echo, you trade him off for a 1/1 goblin, which he already is. And the reason I don't run 4 is I think they're a bit slow for what the deck can do when you draw other creatures. So it's your preference really for the rest of these cards, how many you want to run, but they're definitely good cards to run. Next I run 3 Legion Loyalists, which is a 1-drop haste. He's a 1/1 with Battalion. Whenever he and 2 other creatures attack, all creatures you control gain first strike and trample until the end of the turn and cannot be blocked by tokens, which means what this deck's big problem is like white humans and other decks that summon really fast token spawn. That pretty much deletes the problem entirely, because they can't block them with the tokens anymore, and they can only block them with the token spawning creatures and such like that. It also gives them first strike and trample, so now the 3/2 swingers are twice as dangerous as they were before. Next we have 2 copies of Krenko Mob Boss, which is a 4-drop goblin. Tap, put X 1/1 red goblin tokens onto the battlefield, where X is the number of goblins you control. If you give him haste, he's a 4-drop that turn, you play more goblins, which also have haste if you have Chieftain on the battlefield, which you now have a small army of 2/2 hasting goblins. And like I said, the field-wide buffs in here and the wave tactics that I use, they're really effective. The deck doesn't actually lose that often. Its score is pretty good so far. Next I run 2 Goblin Kings. They're both different art. I'm going to show you this one because the other one's a bit disturbing. He's a 3-drop. He's been errataed to a creature Goblin Lord, and all other goblins get +1/+1 and gain Mountain Walk. He doesn't give himself the buff, which has also been errated in. I just don't have the 10th edition version, and I don't really like the 10th edition version because he's not as pretty as the other 2. Or ugly, I should say, because I like to run ugly goblins. Next is pretty much solely for my wave tactic, which is Foundry Street Denizen. He's a 1-drop. Whenever another red enters the battlefield under your control, you get a +1+. He gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn, which is you summon a goblin or 2. He's now a 3/1 without other goblin card buffs, making him yet again very destructive if you swing with the Legion Loyalist, giving him a large amount of trample damage and a lot of first strike. It's wonderful. Next, I run 1 Sensation Gorger. It's actually 1 to 2, depending on how I'm feeling the deck should be running. But he's a 3-drop. He has Kinship. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your library. If it shares a creature type with them, which is a goblin or a shaman, you may reveal it. And if you do, each player discards his or her hand and draws 4 cards. So this deck will actually end up with 0 hand roughly 4th turn. You'll have no cards in hand just because you've been playing them all. And so, with all of that lost hand advantage, it makes it a pain to come back from like a field clear or something. But he actually really helps. If you play him after a field clear, you have no cards in hand, you drop him, you reveal a goblin next turn, you discard 0 cards, your opponent discards whatever hand advantage they might have added, and you now are up 4 cards more than you were before. I run a Warren Instigator, which is a 2-drop double striker. He's a 1/1, and whenever he deals damage to an opponent, you may put a goblin creature card from your hand on the battlefield. So it's for like casting, really it's for casting Krankos and Chieftains. Trying to get them for a bit cheaper cost, since they can be such a pain in the ass sometimes to get out if you're not drawing the land you need. I run a Vexing Shusher, which is the other one that I bounce in and out of the deck with the Sensation Gorger. He's a 2-drop. He can't be countered when he's played, and you can tap a red or a green, and target spell can't be countered this turn. And so really that's just stopping the quick blue tempo decks that run cards like Mana Leak and that new Song card that came out in Theros, which counters target... I actually wouldn't counter him now that I think about it, but it could counter stuff like your next card that's coming up, like the Goblin Grenade. It counters target instant, sorcery, or enchantment. And so just with 1 extra, because most of the spells and creatures in this deck only cost 1, for 1 you can target that card and it can't be countered by spells or abilities, fully negating the effect of the other card. So here we have a Goblin Grenade, which is a 1-drop sorcery. As an addition to cast it, you sacrifice a goblin, which shouldn't be a problem in this deck. And then you do 5 damage to target creature or player. And you're pretty much never going to pick a creature unless he's really a problem child. But, hold the problem children. He's 5 damage, which is a 1/4 of your opponent's starting health, which is unbelievably good for the cost of another 1-drop goblin. And so if you start a hand with just those and like 3 goblins, the game is already in the bag, because if your opponent can't stop the damage, they're done 3 turns in. Next, we run 4 copies of Lightning Bolt for the weaker problem children, and for 3 damage, because why not? Lightning Bolt is wonderful for a 1-drop, 3/3 for a 1-drop with 3 damage to anything. It's great. And then I run 3 copies of Metamorphose, and the only reason I run Metamorphose is because I didn't want to run any other cards in here. And this is a free draw, because it's a complete transfer. You pay 2, and then add 2 of any color combination in your mana pool, which is always going to be straight red, and then you draw a card. So you're never actually out anything, and you thin the deck. If you draw into multiple Metamorphose, it's fine, because after that first one, you can keep paying Metamorphose's cost for more Metamorphose. And then lands, you can run Cavernous Souls, but they are a bit expensive for my tastes. So I just run 18 Mountains. It fills up the deck. You don't need actually 20 or any more, because 18 will get what you need done. The usual win rate for this deck is about 6 to 7 turns is what you usually win in if you're doing if you're having pretty good draws, because it's so fast and it gets so powerful. Your opponent has an issue stopping it. Even if they start killing all of your creatures, you still have 1-drop haste goblins. I'm Teddy, and this has been a deck tech of Modern Goblins, and I'll see you next Endphase.